This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
What's up, and welcome to Hot Takes, the show where I look at the hot takes that you leave under my videos and then react to them. We got the first one from The Accomplishment, who says this: did you see what Juice said about Kevin giving up the play calling? This controversy, I think, is such a one, like, Kevin's not here anymore, so it really doesn't matter the autopsy of how things went with Kevin, because we've already made the decision to fire him, right? I think this would be a much more relevant conversation if Kevin were still the coach in Cleveland, but he's the coach in Atlanta. So this is a relevant conversation maybe for the Falcons, but not Cleveland. But even like when I try to engage with this conversation about the whole like Jarvis Landry play calling thing, I just find it kind of pointless, because what Jarvis basically said was when he was in Cleveland, now, I don't know about when he wasn't in Cleveland, but when he was in Cleveland, there were times where the offense was struggling and Alex Van Pelt would take over play calling. This is what Jarvis alleged. Now, I don't know when that could have been, because the offense really didn't struggle much in 2020. They were the dominant part of that team. In 2021, there were certainly some struggles. So let's say that Jarvis is telling the truth and Kevin gave the play calling to Alex Van Pelt whenever the team was struggling. Okay. What's the deal there? I mean, is that not Kevin's job to look around at how things are going? Like, honestly, it makes Kevin look better than I think the people who are spreading this story are intending, because it's like, well, if Kevin was willing to give up play calling, then maybe Kevin was much less stubborn than some of us said that he was for not being willing to give up the play calling. Because I remember a lot in 2021 when the offense was struggling, people wanting Kevin to give up the play calling. Well, apparently he did that. Now, I'm kind of skeptical about if Jarvis is telling the truth here, because the reality when it comes to play calling is that it's visible. You can tell who's the play caller by looking at the play caller, right? And both the play callers, if they're in the booth or if they're on the field, are in very visible places. So I find it hard to believe that Kevin secretly changed the play calling and nobody noticed, because I imagine somebody in the media would have found out, because you don't have to have sources to find that out. You just have to have a pair of binoculars and look at Kevin Stefanski while a play is coming in and realize he's not calling the play, right? Or you can look into the booth and see that. And the media booths, by the way, in Cleveland, they're right next to the play calling booths. So like the idea that like the play caller just like changed and nobody knew, that's not how that works. Like you see who's calling the plays. And nobody noticed that Kevin wasn't calling the plays in 2020 or in 2021, which makes me believe that Jarvis is probably lying, or not lying as much as like he's misconstruing something and calling it play calling. Like maybe he's saying that Alex Van Pelt took a bigger role in the game plan when the offense was struggling. But like the play calling itself, I mean, that's a pretty visible element of the game there. And if Kevin wasn't calling the plays, we would have noticed it on the broadcast, because he wouldn't have the play sheet. Or maybe he would have the play sheet, but he's not talking into the headset all the time. You know what I mean? Like it's just basic research there would tell you that the play calling was Kevin's until he gave it up. And that's why coaches announce who the play caller is when they make a change, because they can't hide it. Right? If coaches could hide the play caller change, they would always hide it and they would never announce it, but they can't. So that's why I just don't believe the whole play calling element of this. I think it's possible that he seeked more input from Alex Van Pelt when the offense was struggling. But again, like process-wise, what's wrong with that? You know, that's not a issue I have. Like if the offense was struggling and then he leaned on people to help him fix it, well, I think that's just him being a responsible coach. And if Jarvis paints this out like Alex Van Pelt came in and then helped them fix the offense, and like that was the right way to go about it. And I'm like, okay, well, if he decided that there was a problem, made an adjustment, and that adjustment fixed the problem, then how is that a demonstration of how he can't do his job? Because he just did his job right there. You feel me? That's why I think this whole thing's stupid. On top of the fact that, like, what's being alleged here is something that we could check. Like, you could go and watch the games, and you can see Kevin is calling the plays in 2020 and in 2021. The only game he didn't call the plays was the one he was out because of COVID in the playoffs. Don't really get this controversy, to be honest with you. Next one comes from the Big Red Racing Dog, which is AB is likely to do something completely different than what the pundits have chalked up. People seem to have forgotten last year. Will AB do what AB says he's going to do in the media? No. Right? That's what should have made, and look, I made the mistake too, but going back, that's what should have made my antennas go up about the whole Travis Hunter thing, right? AB was telling us he was going to draft Travis Hunter or how much he liked Travis Hunter, which that's not something AB does. But there have been first round picks or draft picks that AB has made that have been fairly predictable. Because the Browns didn't really care to hide their hand. Like, for example, the Jedrick Wills pick. We knew they were picking Jedrick Wills a month before the draft. Like, that, everybody was locked into that was who they were likely to go with. So, like, it's not just that, whoever the media thinks that AB is going to draft, it's going to be somebody different. No, it's who AB is telling us or telegraphing us he's going to draft. It's going to be somebody completely different. So if Andrew Berry goes out there and he starts talking up Monroe Freeling, antennas should go up. He's not going to draft him more than likely, right? If Andrew Berry goes out there and he's like, man, Carnell Tate's just such an amazing player, he's up to something, you know? But if you're hearing like people are speculating based on need and logic that the Browns are likely to get a wide receiver or offensive tackle, then they're probably going to draft that offensive tackle or a wide receiver because they're a pretty practical front office. You know what I mean? Like, that's my thing with Andrew Berry. Don't get caught up into the rumor mills. Don't get caught up into what AB's trying to tell you is going on. Just read what Andrew Berry's doing and think about what the next step is logically based on what he's actually done. And that's why I think it's very likely that they take a wide receiver or offensive tackle, because that's what makes sense based on what they have actually done. So the math on AB shouldn't be just because people think that he's going to do this, he's going to do the opposite. That's not the case. When it was obvious based on the logic of the roster that the Browns were going to draft a tackle in 2020, Andrew Berry drafted a tackle, right? When Jim Schwartz got here and it was obvious that the Browns needed to draft defensive tackles, they drafted defensive tackles. The read for Andrew Berry is don't trust what he is saying or don't trust what you're hearing rumors are saying that he's saying. But if you're following the pathway of Andrew Berry's decisions and it logically points to one thing or the other, then that's probably a good way to go. Everything I've ever successfully predicted about Andrew Berry and the Cleveland Browns has been by doing that, right? Like when it became obvious that Kevin was going to get fired, right? Just follow the pathways on what they're doing. That's what's important to follow with Kevin, and I think that's what's pushing people to wide receiver or offensive tackle. All right, this next one is about Pat McAfee from my video about Dan Orlovsky. Pat's kind of separate from ESPN in that he doesn't work for ESPN. He has a contract to air his show on ESPN, but he doesn't have to answer from anybody in terms of programming, doing hot take content. I'm sure he has contractual obligations, but he's famously gotten into it with higher ups, doesn't answer to them. Yeah, I think this point was true with even Dan Le Batard, right? And some people like Dan, some people don't. I'm a fan of Dan Le Batard. And he had a similar agreement with ESPN to where he produces his show and ESPN owns the license to lease some of his IPs, right? And air them. That's why he's allowed to keep the same branding that he had when he was with ESPN now that he's with Meadowlark. I understand that Pat McAfee is under a much bigger version of that deal. And that's kind of what his situation is. And that way, yeah, you can retain, we're talking about Dan Le Batard, we're talking about Pat McAfee. These are people who aren't really in that ESPN hot take machine for better or worse. So yeah, there is a way to do ESPN without completely having to feed into the machine. What I'm focusing on with Dan in this video, or the video that you're talking about, is the machine, which is like First Take, Get Up. You know, the debate panel shows, right? If you become a fixture on those shows, well, there's only one direction that's going to take you, which is through the machine. When Dan's on NFL Live or NFL Game Day, one of the shows that ESPN does that's not about debate, but more about like actual education of the game, and he's on there, he's actually pretty good, you know? But when you put, it's like football. You're going to play the position that you're asked to play, right? So if you put, you know, Tyreek Hill in the position to be a number one wide receiver, he shows that he could do that. But if you pigeonhole Tyreek Hill to being a guy who can catch end arounds and do some gadget plays, then you're going to think that's all he could do because that's all you're asking him to do. ESPN's a similar place where it's like, hey, yeah, when he's doing those debate shows, you're going to get debate brain, right? Because you're going to just think of everything as a debate, everything is a topic, everything is content to have a debate, and then you end up on the Pat McAfee show in your car arguing nonsense, right? You know what I mean? So yeah, it's more about the machine that is ESPN than like Dan himself. And when you fall into that machine. But yeah, it's more about the machine than anything else. WWZ says one thing Andrew Berry doesn't get enough credit for is signing the extension for Myles. They did not rip up the contract. Rather, it's an extension on the Browns longer. So I think he did a really good job. I mean, like, the thing about Andrew Berry that I appreciate is when it comes time to re-up premium players, he's really proactive about it, right? So you never end up in a situation where you have to give a guy a bad contract because Andrew is planning these things out ahead of time. There's a lot of front offices where that does not happen, you know? But I think Baltimore is a great example of this. They're always running behind on these Lamar extensions, right? And they're always paying him more than they would have to. The same could be said with like Cincinnati, right? So I think, yeah, that is a strength of Andrew Berry's that, you know, there's not a lot of credit thrown around there. But I think that that's definitely something to think about with Andrew. All right. Fans say that Haslam doesn't care about winning, but I think it's just the opposite. He is uber competitive, and he wanted to win that Watson trade because of his competitive personality, and it has ruined the Browns over the last 5 years. I think that's partly true, that Jimmy is super competitive, and he does want to win. I think sometimes Jimmy doesn't understand that you got to just be more patient than what he has been. And to Jimmy's credit, he's been more patient over the last few years, right? But that's been the thing that's gotten him in trouble. Being aggressive and being in on the Watson thing, I think that's fine. Trying to force the Watson thing with money, I think that's where we walked into a problem. You know, so that to me is Haslam's issue, is he doesn't know when to fold, right? Like, he is the guy who's going all in all the time, and you usually just end up broke when you're doing that. You got to know when to hold him. You got to know when to fold him. Jimmy don't know when to fold him. He don't know when to fold him. He don't know when to say, hey, the odds are a little rough here, right? Jimmy always believes that it can go right, no matter what. And sometimes you just need to know when to fold him. And that's Jimmy's biggest problem. But I want to thank you guys for having these hot takes. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.